All right, so today we're going deep, really deep into a period, I think you'd agree, that's absolutely pivotal in modern history,
Oh, yeah.
pre-revolution Iran,
Yeah.
but we're doing it through a very specific lens,
Yeah.
the lens of the Shah himself,
Right.
using his autobiography, Answer to History,
Fascinating.
and try to understand his thinking,
Eh,
his decisions during this time of just unbelievable change and upheaval.
It's amazing, you get to kind of sit there
Yeah.
virtually right next to the man making these world-altering decisions.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a front row seat to history,
Yeah,
and hopefully it's going to be revealing, right?
absolutely.
Let's start, though, at the beginning with the Shah's early life,
Yeah.
which just reading about it was anything but ordinary.
Yeah.
Just imagine being born into a Persia that's basically controlled by,
Right.
these outside powers, Britain and Russia.
Absolutely. It was a pressure cooker for
Yeah.
Iran.
And then on top of that, right, you've got this young Shah growing up under the shadow of, well, his father,
The Laity,
a giant of a figure.
who basically pulled Iran up from its bootstraps.
Oh, yeah. Modernize the military, set the stage for, well, everything that came after.
Right. So, I mean, talk about a tough act to follow.
Absolutely.
How much do you think, just from reading Answer to History, how much do you think that relationship, that father-son dynamic, impacted the Shah's thinking?
Oh, it's all over the book.
Yeah.
You can just sense that weight of legacy, the expectation to not just live up to, but maybe even surpass his father's accomplishments.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine?
it's like, how do you even begin to think about
Yeah.
filling those shoes, right?
And then, just as he's sort of coming into his own, World War II explodes,
Yeah.
and boom, he's on the throne at 22.
22 years old.
Yeah, talk about trial by fire.
Oh my gosh. Thrown into the deep end
Absolutely.
with, of course, Iran occupied by British from Russian forces.
Talk about a delicate situation.
Yeah, talk about a no-win scenario, right?
Yeah, I mean, how do you even begin to navigate that? I'm really curious how he did. I mean, well, that's the beauty of Answer to History.
Yeah.
We get to see, I mean, he talks about meeting Stalin, Churchill, Roosevelt at the Tehran conference in 43.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, to be a fly on the wall for those conversations.
Oh, right. Especially with Stalin.
Yeah, talk about, not exactly Mr. Personality.
No, not at all. But what's fascinating is the Shah describes him as surprisingly polite.
Really?
Yeah, even jovial.
Huh.
Assuring the Shah that, hey, we respect Iran's sovereignty, we're not going to interfere.
Right. Which, well,
Hindsight's 2020.
yeah, history tells a bit of a different story.
A little bit.
I mean, it really highlights, I think, just how difficult, impossible almost it must have been for the Shah to deal with these figures.
These titans.
Yeah, with their own ambitions, their own agendas.
Absolutely. Playing their own game on a global chessboard.
And then, on top of all of that, you've got the internal challenges.
Oh, of course. Can't forget about those. The rise of the Tudeh party
The
with
communist
ties to Moscow.
always lurking in the background.
I mean, how much of a threat did he see them as, particularly in those early years?
Oh, a direct threat
Yeah.
to his authority. Absolutely.
You combine that with, the foreign interference that we talked about.
Yeah, you've got a recipe for instability.
It's a volatile mix.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, you've got the early 1950s
Oh, yeah.
with, I mean, talk about a turning point.
Yeah, a real turning point.
The nationalization of the oil industry.
Huge.
And this is where, of course, Mossadegh enters the picture.
Oh, a charismatic figure, no doubt.
Yeah, and those nationalistic sentiments.
Oh, yeah, he really tapped into something there.
I mean, it was a bold move.
Absolutely.
Basically saying, hey, we're taking control of our own resources.
Exactly.
But how did the Shah view this?
It's fascinating, actually,
Yeah.
because in Answer to History, you see this really complex, often tense relationship between the two. The Shah, on one hand, he admires Mossadegh's patriotism, right?
Sure.
But on the other hand, he sees him as a threat
Of course.
to his own authority.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that clash leads to the Shah's exile in 53.
Wow.
Yeah, forced to flee his own country.
I mean, that must have been humiliating.
Oh, absolutely, a major turning point.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that the Shah claims that later on, documents surfaced showing that the Tudeh party,
Wait, the communists?
yeah, they were actually planning to eliminate Mossadegh.
Wow, really? So they were allied with him and then...
It's a tangled web, isn't it?
That's incredible.
It really makes you think about who was pulling the string.
Yeah, what was really going on behind the scenes?
Exactly.
So the Shah returns, Mossadegh is overthrown.
Yeah.
And it really, you can't overstate the impact of that event
Oh, it cast a long shadow.
and the rest of his rule.
Yeah, it solidified his control, but it also cemented that image of him as being too close to the West,
Right, right.
which would come back to haunt him.
It's like every victory comes with a price.
It often does.
So Mossadegh is gone, the Shah is back in control,
Right.
and he sets his sights on modernizing Iran.
Making it a powerhouse.
And this is where we get the White Revolution, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
His grand plan to propel Iran into the modern world.
I mean, that's a massive undertaking.
Oh, absolutely.
What were some of the key reforms?
Well, you name it. Land redistribution, literacy campaigns, women's suffrage, economic development, the whole 9 yards.
Wow, it sounds like he was trying to do everything at once.
He was.
But, I mean, that kind of rapid change,
Rarely goes smoothly.
no, there's going to be pushback
Oh, yeah.
from somewhere.
And there was, from traditional forces like the clergy, and even from everyday Iranians who felt like they were being left behind.
Right, so even with the best intentions,
Yeah.
you can end up creating these unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
And this is where the Shah's perspective, I think, gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because he argues that this opposition, it wasn't just about the pace of change.
Right. It was something more sinister, what he calls
Yeah.
this unholy alliance of red and black.
A potent phrase.
We're going to unpack that a little bit later.
Okay.
But I think it's important to understand how much that idea shaped his thinking.
His worldview.
Yeah, how he viewed the opposition.
Absolutely.
But before we get into that, I want to talk about the Shah's relationships with,
Right.
the U.S. and Great Britain.
The Western powers.
Because on the surface, he's seen as a close ally.
Right.
But Answer to History really reveals this growing frustration
Oh, yeah.
with these relationships.
There's definitely tension there.
So it's like he's trying to modernize. He wants close ties with the West,
Yeah.
but he also wants Iran to be independent.
To stand on its own 2 feet.
I mean, talk about a balancing act.
It's a tough needle to thread.
And as we'll see as we continue this deep dive, it's a balancing act that becomes increasingly difficult
Oh, yeah.
to maintain as we head into the 1970s.
Right, the stakes get higher.
And ultimately, it leads to, well, a dramatic and tragic climax.
Yeah.
This desire for independence, it wasn't just about national pride for the Shah.
Right.
It was tied to some very real anxieties he had about, well, the global balance of power,
Okay.
particularly what he saw as a growing threat from, well,
The Soviet Union.
the Soviet Union, exactly.
I mean, he was pretty vocal, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah,
About Soviet expansionism.
especially in Afghanistan.
Yeah, right on Iran's doorstep.
He saw what was happening, and he felt like the West, they were just, I don't know,
Underestimating it.
yeah, underestimating the danger, too focused on containing communism in Europe.
Right, like they had blinders on.
Exactly, and missing this other,
Yeah.
potentially even more dangerous force brewing,
Which one?
radical Islam.
Yeah, that's a key theme in Answer to History.
It is.
This idea that the West is so focused on one enemy
The red thread,
that they're completely missing this other.
a black thread,
Yeah, and in some cases, even helping it along.
inadvertently, of course.
Of course.
But still, it's like he's watching the seeds of his own downfall being sown.
Yeah, and by the very people he considered allies.
It's a real tragedy.
And it's here, I think, that this idea of the, what did he call it?
The unholy alliance.
Yeah, the unholy alliance of red and black, it really starts to take shape.
Right, this idea that these groups, these seemingly opposing forces, they could actually find common cause
Against a shared enemy,
against a shared enemy. Exactly.
which in this case was the Shah.
Of course.
It makes you wonder if he saw this playing out on a bigger stage too, not just within Iran.
Well, he definitely hints at that.
Yeah,
This sense that the world was, I don't know, coming apart at the seams.
right, a breakdown of the old order.
Exactly. And he puts a lot of the blame on the West
For failing to recognize the threat.
for being complacent.
I mean, it's pretty chilling when you think about what happened in Iran.
And in the region as a whole,
Yeah, it's like he saw it coming,
he did.
but nobody was listening.
It's a common refrain throughout history, isn't it?
So, back to Iran in the late 70s.
Yeah.
You've got the Shah facing mounting opposition. His alliance with the West is fraying.
And Khomeini is waiting in the wings.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster.
It was a perfect storm.
And on top of all of that, you have this sense, at least from reading Answer to History,
Yeah.
that the Shah felt increasingly isolated.
Abandoned by his friends, demonized by the media.
He really felt like the media had misrepresented him, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Like they painted him as this tyrant.
Instead of the modernizer he saw himself as.
Yeah, and he really blamed them for fueling the opposition.
He saw their coverage as biased, sensationalized,
driven by an agenda.
Exactly.
It's amazing how much power those narratives can have.
They shape perceptions.
Yeah, and it's hard to fight back against that even when you're a head of state.
He felt betrayed by the media, just as he felt betrayed by his Western allies.
And that brings us, I think, to one of the most controversial aspects of Answer to History.
Okay.
His account of the final days before he left Iran.
Yeah, this is where things get really murky.
He puts a lot of emphasis on the role of General Heiser.
The American envoy sent to Tehran,
Right, in the middle of the crisis.
a pivotal moment.
The Shah claims that Heiser was sent to basically neutralize the Iranian military.
To prevent any resistance to Khomeini,
Yeah, like a deliberate act of sabotage.
the final betrayal.
But the U.S., of course, has always denied that.
They say Heiser was there to prevent a coup.
Right, to stabilize the situation.
It's a he said, she said kind of situation.
And we may never know the full truth.
Probably not.
But what's clear is that the Shah felt abandoned.
Totally alone.
Like his fate had been decided by forces beyond his control.
And so he makes the decision to leave.
To go into exile.
A heartbreaking moment, really.
You can feel the weight of that decision in his writing.
The loss, the uncertainty.
Leaving behind everything he knew.
His home, his country.
And with that, I think we're ready to move into the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
where we'll explore how the Shah grappled with those questions, those doubts.
And how he tried to make sense of what happened.
To answer history, as it were, reading through these final chapters of Answer to History, you can really feel, I don't know, almost like a sense of melancholy.
Yeah, there's definitely a sadness there.
Like this weight, this heaviness hanging over everything.
I mean, you have to imagine what it must have been like for him
Yeah.
to leave Iran, to go into exile.
It was more than just leaving a place, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. He was losing a part of himself.
And he talks about that, this feeling of abandonment
By his allies, by the media.
by people he trusted.
He felt like the world had turned its back on him.
And of course, there's the loss of his vision.
Yeah.
This idea of a modern, prosperous country.
The dream that crumbled.
Yeah, and he really lays the blame for that, I think, at the feet of this.
This unholy alliance.
Yeah, this unholy alliance of red and black.
He saw them as the puppet masters.
Yeah, pulling the strings, manipulating events.
Exploiting people's anger, their frustrations.
For their own gain.
To seize power.
And he really believed, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
That the West just didn't get it.
They were so focused on the communists
On the red threat.
that they missed the bigger picture.
The black threat.
Yeah, and how dangerous that could be.
And looking back now,
It's hard not to see the truth in his words.
yeah, he was warning about this stuff decades ago.
And nobody was listening.
So there he is, in exile,
Stripped of everything,
powerless.
thinking about what went wrong.
Trying to make sense of it all.
It's a powerful image.
I mean, did he ever express regret
For his actions.
for the things that maybe led to this downfall?
He does admit to some mistakes.
Yeah,
Particularly with, the political repression.
right, silencing his critics.
He acknowledges that his government went too far at times.
But he still maintains, doesn't he,
Oh, absolutely.
that it was all necessary
To protect Iran.
to keep the country stable.
To combat the enemies he saw all around him.
It's that classic dilemma, isn't it?
Security versus freedom.
The balance that every leader has to try to find.
And often gets wrong.
But even in exile, you get the sense that he never really lost faith
In himself.
in his vision for Iran.
He still believed, I think, that he was on the right side of history.
That he had been dealt a bad hand.
That forces beyond his control had conspired against him.
And there's a certain tragedy to that,
Absolutely.
This man who had dedicated his life to his country,
So modernizing it.
to making it a global power.
And it all slipped away.
But even then, even with all that loss,
Yeah.
he never gave up hope
For Iran.
for the future.
He still believed in the potential of his people.
It's a powerful message, I think.
It is.
One that transcends the politics, the personal struggles,
The human spirit's ability to endure.
to find hope even in the darkest of times.
And that's what makes Answer to History such a compelling read.
Yeah, it's more than just a memoir.
It's a historical document, a testament to a pivotal moment in time.
A reminder that history is never really black and white.
There are always multiple perspectives, multiple truths,
And that we have to be willing to engage with all of them.
even the ones that make us uncomfortable,
Even the ones that challenge our assumptions.
because that's how we learn. That's how we grow.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Shah's perspective,
Yeah.
I'm left with this profound sense of, I don't know, the complexity of history,
Absolutely.
the enduring power of narratives,
And how important it is to keep asking
to
questions,
keep searching for answers,
to never stop learning,
to always be open to new perspectives.
because it's the only way we can truly understand the past.
And maybe, just maybe, avoid repeating its mistakes.